We're a Brussels-based platform. We're interested in research and innovation. We have over 130 members, and we're very much interested in developing this research and innovation policy and also widening participation. So I get that. Just to say where we came from, because it's a bit of the WIRE journey is in here. We started in 2001 as an informal network when regions didn't really know what was going on the research and innovation agenda. It was the Lisbon agenda. People go back to that Lisbon strategy time. And you'll see there we started with an FP6 Regions of Knowledge project. And when people say, well, what are the use of projects and, what do you get out of a European project? This is what we got out of it, was a sustainable network coming up to 2000 and now, today. This is very also important for us, I think, at WIRE. It's really looking at what is Erin's purpose. We're looking at how we can really look at innovation from a place-based perspective. And that's very much a WIRE. This is what WIRE is all about. We're looking at how we can see research and innovation as a key driver of the economy, and I think now we seem to accept that as coming through. We saw that really this morning's discussion, which was very interesting. But also we're trying to, another buzzword that we're trying to build is this regional innovation ecosystem. So this is very part of that. Now, one I think is saying, why are we here? Well, the question is, well, this is the 8th edition of WIRE, so we must be doing something right. And there is a 9th one coming up. So, some people think there is a role for WIRE. And for me, there is a role for WIRE because it's very much aimed at this regional issues. We start from the region and then we work around what are the key issues that are facing regions today and the key trends. We're here because of the networking and meeting new people, meeting new ideas, raising our own profile, raising the profile of who we are, what Kosice is doing, looking at community building, looking at partnerships. And this, again, the word has come through quite a lot today in these meetings here. So what is the WIRE coming up? What is interesting for this WIRE, I think, is that we're in a different position than we were last year. I feel that being British, and now Belgian, by the way. Allez les Belges. So I'm Brexit, Trump, the rise of populism. We saw that a little bit coming out, the globalization debate that we're having now. We brought that up a couple of times. And we sort of see this in two areas, this future of Europe and also the future of research and innovation. So we're coming to these two interesting periods. And this is the moment we're talking about the future of FP9. And there will be a big event on Monday on looking at this high-level group on where are we going on future of research and innovation. And then also last week, or this week, we also had a big conference in Brussels on the future of cohesion policy. So these two major aspects of funding for Europe are coming up for discussion now and over the next year. So it's a very important time for us in policy period. I just want to mention the future of Europe. This comes from this sort of notion of Brexit. What's the crisis in Europe? So what the European Union have done is put its big discussion ideas forward called the future of Europe. And if you're not aware, there's two very important papers and useful papers to read. One is called the social dimension of Europe. And this social dimension, I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, is very important because it faces really more or less of what we've been discussing the last 2 days. And the other one, which I won't mention, but it's come up again, is harnessing globalization. And that came up again this morning. Who controls the technology? Who controls the values? Who controls the cultures of what's going on in Europe on that level? So those, if you haven't read them, look them up. They're worth reading. Now, very quickly, the social dimension is Europe, sort of, as we saw, a catalyst of global forces, market forces? That this is the sort of idea that we're being dominated by Google, Android, all the things. Is socialism really a matter for national and regional government? It's not a European dimension. Or is social Europe a key to the core of Europe, of what Europe is? And it's certainly quite clear there's been a shift, I think, in the last year, moving towards seeing social inclusion as a major key driver now in Europe. Or if Europe is going to continue, we have to have this social inclusive agenda coming through. Now I'm going to flip through lots and lots of slides, so you'll get them on the PowerPoint if you want to look them up later. So I hope I'm going to go through them. First of all, inequality. You can see the difference between if we were living in Luxembourg or if we're living in Bulgaria. massive in jobs and skills, unemployment, skills in terms of the PISA studies, aging, Europe at 45 years, average age, median age compared to North America and Africa, look at 21. Lifestyles, we're going to more and more one-person lifestyles in Europe. Gender, labor market. This is quite interesting because that has also come up a lot on the last 2 days, is looking at labor market and changes of the labor market. Work in the future, looking at this disruptive innovation, incremental, flexible contracts, and new forms of employment. We've talked a lot about that as well in there. And what are the concerns of Europe's unemployment, social inequality, social protection, looking at all these sort of areas that Europeans are now concerned about. So what do we do? I'm not going to go through that because that's all in there and on that level, so moving the debate. So coming up to WIRE. So that was the point I wanted to make, though, that WIRE is not just in, it is in a context, and a much wider context now in what European thinking is going on. So why are we here? That was a question we raised, right? Simone raised this question, why are you here? So this is a question you should be reflecting on. You might ask her after 10 minutes, you might ask her that, why am I here? We are responsible. That was another thing that Simone made the point. And because of the hologram, if you notice, there was no escape. And it's quite an interesting point, that we cannot just go off and say, this is not our problem. This is the problem for everybody. And particularly for us, because we are, in a way, the movers and shakers of change. Because we are here. Why are we here? Because we want to change things, we want to do things on that future. So let's go through what we just taught. So now a quick revision. We sort of said WIRE2017 is a continuation of the Slovak. So it's a thing, research and innovation doesn't stop after 6 months. This has been a way of moving that debate on. Importance of research and innovation for the competitiveness, quality of life. R&I concerns all institutions, all levels and political government. Kieran was making that point this morning as well. The challenges that we're facing up is the innovation divide and what we're going to do about the future. The Commission is in listening mode. Well, they should be, because there are going to be changes. So this is a good time if they're in listening mode, but more emphasis on inclusive growth. EIB, 14 billion, but without people, things don't happen. Innovation is both top-down, you need a government to push it, you need the EU to push it, but it's bottom-up as well. And what are the role of universities in these ecosystems? And this need for a greater social impact of research and innovation came through. So again, we got this idea of this ecosystem approach coming from Markku, if you remember. So you talk about the local buzz, global pipeline, if people go back, some geographers in the room. Place-based innovation again, quadruple helix, again, it's come up again today. Cohesion is a must and should be linked to FP9. Big debate on that. We'll come back on that on the widening. More partnership, learning and sharing. Academics linked to the real economy. How much are the academics in a silo? Need they get out? How do we get them out? Smart cities and smart citizens. We heard that from some other, from other people. Avoid technology. Only technology solutions don't work. We need smart citizens as well. Openness, widening, citizen science, science with and for society, responsible research and innovation, open data, innovation in finance, complementing public grant funding with private loan. We talked about PPPs, public-private, in the last session as well. Widening. And then we had the excellence and main criteria, but there's a shared responsibility to close the gap on both sides on that level. Need for synergies, compatibility, alignment between funding instruments. Future budget need to be more with less. This is a big area. The Brexit is removing 10 to 20 billion from the budget. What do we do? Then we had this thing of the OECD. Income disparities are rising. How do we foster inclusive growth? Again, OECD concerns about this area. Challenges of market capture. I like the thing that the EU is a cash dispenser for California. Good quote. Digital innovation. So the welfare gains, we have affordable products. ICT, lower transaction costs. We've got the e-commerce, e-health, e-education, e-government. But I looked up the MOOCs, the big future. 8 to 15% success rate. 80% of MOOCs are in English. So we talked about the 16-year-old Slovakian girl in the countryside, hope she's got English as a backup language. Disruptive innovation, competitive competition dynamics, Uber and Airbnb. Some of the things, Uber has brought its own Uberization. Challenges of market capture, we said that again on there, and the productivity gaps across regions is widening. And how to narrow the gap between leading and lagging regions. We need traditional science and technology and innovation policies, but they often, excellence begets excellence. Excellence goes to excellence. Agglomeration effects, we know about agglomeration effects, and we know that capital city effects, which is very driving a lot of the East and Central Europe. Capital cities are doing well. We're reducing the gaps. How do we do it? We're looking for inclusive policies, looking for underrepresented groups, and higher education can foster inclusive growth. Entry to students from disadvantaged background, more tertiary in remote areas, and financial incentive to enroll underrepresented groups. These were some of the ideas that came out on that level. And these were some of the policy initiatives. I won't go through those, but they're there, they were mentioned. And then we went on to the digital single innovation for greater social impact. And here I think was a very interesting debate about co-creation. It was a rich debate. It's very difficult to summarize everything there. But you can see we had the debate around co-creation. We had the problem, from our Nestor example, we had this sort of problems with lots of startups, lots of fragmentation, lots of ideas, but the problem is scale-up in Europe, often the case. It's not the startups anymore, it's more the scale-ups. How do we get to the area of that? And one of the areas was collaboration is more needed. We need to collaborate between cities, between initiatives, and too often they're fragmented. One of the barriers mentioned was the public sector. That's come up again and again, today, that the public sector is not digitally literate. It is behind the curve on many areas. Procurement was a big area that came up. How do we drive demand-led innovation? Well, public pre-commercial procurement, we saw that example in Dublin. We know it happens in Eindhoven. Question was also, we're collecting data, but what data for whom? How is that data really relevant to people and on their real lives? And then we talked about this collaboration again in Open Innovation 2.0. So the role of the intermediaries, who are the intermediaries in this debate? The measuring the impact, it was an interesting, and I like the idea of the Helsinki save an hour a day concept, one that they're trying to build through. The scale of action, who does what and where, and obviously we see all these sort of things, and one of the key points was that one size doesn't fit all. There is no one answer to everything. And then we had creativity for innovation. Obviously, when you have creatives, you have a very rich debate and interesting. That was a very good example. We had the example of the beehive. People might have seen these beehive sculptures, and they were fascinating to see. And this was all about creating conditions. I was asking you whether the bees were actually paid for their work. They're obviously on short-term contracts, but they actually are given the conditions to create some of these sculptures, but you don't know what they're going to create. And it's very much a good metaphor. By providing conditions and frameworks for innovation, you have the help where the bees can take you in the right way, but you don't know if they're going to actually deliver what you really want. That was also an interesting area looking at the language of creativity, discourse, of technology, the role we're talking about more of creativity in coming up very much area. The idea of evaluation, how do we evaluate the role of culture and creativity in society? There was a good example of a hospital book club in the United States that was sort of reducing stress with doctors, and that was measurable. How do we get wider citizen involvement in education, the notion of creative class? There was a big debate around Richard Florida's work of whether there is a creative class and whether this is a new sort of Marxist class base of creatives versus non-creatives. And then, of course, we have the fourth industrial revolution, again, that's come up quite a bit, of whether the creative spheres could be moving in as well, that software now is seen as a creativity in that level, and the role of artists in the workplace, that's been done a lot, but it's a very strong area, how we get creativity into the workplace on that level. And last but not least, next year is the year of cultural heritage. It's coming back, years of, and cultural heritage will be back on that level. And what I liked, but I think Nuna made this point, we need a new digital Bauhaus. For those of you who are fans of Bauhaus architecture, it'll be the 100th year in 2019. Do we need a new digital Bauhaus thinking around joining people together? And then we had a debate around the widening, and of course, we had this thing of the widening doesn't come just now. We started in RegPot, or as we call it, regional potential, research potential, that started many years ago. And then we had the Regions of Knowledge program as well that had been starting for many years ago, which had also had a widening perspective. And now we've got the ERA chairs. We have some excellent examples of successful ERA chairs. We're looking at twinning and we're looking at teaming. And this is a very interesting sort of area that we're working on. And also then we looked at cohesion policy and smart specialization. And this is an area now which we haven't mentioned. Normally when I go to a conference, I talk but nothing about smart. Everything is smart specialization, but it hasn't come up too much today, but luckily. And then Slovakia is this example of what is our smart specialization, what are our priorities, how do we link the smart specializations with the areas we're doing in research and innovation on that level. And then we had some questions on some of the early sort of ERA chairs, how are we dealing with university administration, some of the issues of languages, some of the issues of twinning and building trust, looking at the teaming, the geographical criteria, should we be linking in more geographical criteria into FP9, very dangerous topic, and then cost actions, and there's much more attention to the EU13 with the cost as various things. And then the other things we had, how do we sell widening to advanced countries? What's in it for the advanced countries? What's in it for them? What's in it for me? How do we find the win-wins? How do we clarify the benefits? How do we do the branding, the visibility? Should we use a smart city approach for the lead and follower idea? Lead cities, follower cities? And how we need to build a widening community and building this sort of community of practice. And just an anecdote around the Smart Regions conference in Helsinki, which was on smart specialization, there was a lot of this community of practice being built up around that we could see on that level. And then this morning, I think everybody agrees, a fascinating debate, excellent debate, responsible digital futures, this idea of globalization, science diplomacy. Moidash is also very into this sort of science diplomacy of Europe and this sort of soft power and this, how do we deal with globalization? And you had that debate today about technology, values and culture, which are all who runs what? What is being developed by whom? So this was an interesting one. We then came up, of course, the fourth industrial revolution, this convergence versus competition. And remember, disparities between and within regions. Remember, we started off with an excellent film, if you remember, on looking at how technologies were being used. And then the modernization agenda that Kieran was talking about, interoperability, standardization, regional broadband, digital skills, partnership, connectivity versus collaboration. And then we had this idea of the digital value for industry and society, private sector benefit more. They have the organizational aims to capture value. We have the public sector, what we often call the tragedy of the commons. We have the jobs issues, the e-commerce, and I put under there, because that was mentioned, this unintended consequences. E-commerce, which is closing down some city centers or reducing the city center attractiveness. It's also increasing traffic. So two things that well, perhaps there are unintended consequences, but they certainly have other factors that are coming in. Environment, we talk about e-waste, trust, and some of you may know this Edelman Trust Index, which the last one showed a dramatic collapse in trust in all kinds of politicians, of academics, and this distrust of the elite coming through on that level. And the last thing I put is this sat-nav, and I'll have the big debate, who is going to give you directions, your wife or the sat-nav? And we now automatically go to the sat-nav. So it's interesting that we have gone, immediately in our lives now, we rely on technology rather than somebody person, and that's done every day on that level. And so responsible digital futures, citizens, consumers, prosumers, corporates bad, NGOs good, governments, not sure, WikiLeaks, whose data, public-private, and this obviously came through very clearly, education, new models, who drives, who is going to drive this, and the speed of change was the slow, things are too slow. Leadership is often up to the next election. You know, it was the point with our politicians, you know, we lead until when is the next election? Then, you know, and then we need the champions. We need the champions that go beyond the next elections on that level. So conclusions, innovation. Innovation must be on the agenda for all regions, all communities. Inclusive growth. And I think this came up very clearly, that we have more attention to responsible research and innovation, RRI, and social dimension, this SSH, social sciences and humanities, to be drivers of the next program. Impact, how do we measure societal impact and how do we get more? And that's a big issue now that's coming up again on FP9. And then I put the word I for integration, okay? So, but it's synergies, it's compatibility, it can be alignment. And what I think is interesting, and somebody told me this on Monday, so I'm stealing their idea, but that's what we're here for, is the mayor of Tampere uses this Lego brick. So if you look at the one here, you see, I don't know if it's going to work. Don't know. If you look, this one here, these are the instruments, if you like, we've got in Europe. It's a pile of bricks. Well, our job really in the future is to put those pile of bricks together. This is what the compatibility is all about, is making sure that those bricks fit together on that level, on there. I wanted the last two slides. This is something that we're saying in ERIN, so this is my own ERIN slides that we're putting forward. We need to develop this regional research and innovation ecosystem. We see this cohesion policy and FP9 being driven very much by a smart specialization gearbox. So it's joining up is the first question. We need to join up in our region, and we need to join up between regions. So the thing that we're here today is not so much doing what we're doing in our region, it's how do we link with other regions and how do we link with other people in this room is the key area, and that is where the real European added value is, and that is why the added value of WIRE is being here today. So, Dziękuję, and thank you for the speakers, thank you to the rapporteur, thanks to the organizer, DGRTD, and Kosice, obviously, we said thanks to Rada audience, and also my now thanks is to our moderator, Suzanne. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Richard. Wow. What a great job. What a great job to wrap up this in just 15 to 20 minutes, what we have been talking about, and also giving us the context, because it's true, it's already the 8th WIRE conference and we are heading for the next edition. So thank you very, very much. And I maybe forgot to tell you that all presentations will be on the WIRE site. We are waiting for some permission for some speakers to put it, but I think over the weekend, next week, you will find the presentations you might search for. Professor Stanislav Kmeť, may I give you the floor? You were one of the ones who opened this conference. Thank you very much for having you here again for your closing words.
And dear guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is and it was great honor for us for Technical University of Kosice to organize this type of conferences. I would like to thank you and thank all the organizers for excellent participation and preparation of this beautiful and very important event, especially to Associate Professor Mr. Delina and his team. A special thanks belongs to European Commission, especially to Magda de Carlo and President Markula for were supporting this event. Special thanks belong to all the participants, speakers, reporters, and moderators for perfect work. Thank you, Simona, for your moderation. WIRE 2017 can be considered as finished. Vivat WIRE 2018 in Austria. We are looking forward to our meeting in Tirol during the Austrian Presidency of the Council WIRE 2018 with named Innsbruck calling. Allow me to give a symbolic relay to our colleague Sabine from Austria. Thank you very much for your attention.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank
Nice
you.
to meet you.
Hello, who's calling?
Innsbruck calling. Hello, everyone. Just let me check where to start the slides.
So,
May I introduce you to our host for next year's WIRE conference 2018 in Innsbruck, Sabine.
Thank you for having us here and giving us the opportunity to briefly introduce next year's conference. But first of all, where do I put it? Oh yeah. Ďakujem. Thank you very much for having us. It was great being here, and we're really excited to be organizing next year's conference. The conference will take place in the region of the Tirol. Actually, when I talk about the Tirol and I tell people I come from the Tirol, this is what people think about: skiing. And indeed, we have a long history of alpine sports, and sometimes we call ourselves the skiing nation #1. But the conference is going to be during summer, don't be afraid. So if you decide to stay longer, there's other things to do. You can go climbing, you can go biking, or maybe you can go walk on some of those 15,000 kilometers of hiking trails we have in our region. So, okay. That was too far, so that's fine. Better like that. With all those sports and recreational activities, you might already know that tourism plays a very important part in the Tyrol. We have right now about 47 million overnight stays per year. This is more than, for example, Berlin or Rome, just to name a few. Sorry, not enough hands. The possibilities for sports and recreational activities have created a tourism hotspot, but there's more to it than that. The connection between habitat and recreational space has led to a high quality of life and high life satisfaction. Tirol is also interesting for companies as a business location. This is actually a photograph of Innsbruck that you can see here. We have high life satisfaction, high life satisfaction and high quality of life. When it comes to economy and businesses, you might even know some of the global players that are present in the Tyrol. It's GE with the Fischbacher division, there's Sandoz, and also some of the regional players, which are, for example, Medel or with the cochlear implants, or Swarovski with the crystals. This is actually a picture illustrating that when we're talking about gross value added in the Tyrol, the service sector with tourism in it creates about 70% of it, whereas industry generates 30% of our gross value added. So, whoops. Let me briefly talk about infrastructure. The reason that Tyrol has developed tourism very early, and also the central location in Europe, one of the reasons why we have a very good infrastructure. You can easily go to Innsbruck by car or train from Munich, Zurich, Bolzano, wherever. And we also do have an airport, Innsbruck, which actually makes Innsbruck the transportation hub of the Tyrol. So you might just want to go fly there. Yes. This is what it would look like if you were landing during the day. This also shows us that the alpine surroundings that have made us successful in the tourism area pose some challenges as well. For example, in the Tyrol, we have only 12% of the whole space is suitable for a permanent settlement. The rest is simply too vertical for it. So you have a densely populated area. Those 12% amount to about 1,500 square kilometers. There's currently 730,000 people living there. So that's quite a lot. Therefore, issues like spatial planning, mobility, sustainability are very important for us in the Tyrol region. Oh, this is the old presentation, right? this is actually where we would like to welcome you next year. It's a shot of Innsbruck. This is our kind of skyline. We'd be looking forward to seeing you there next year from July 4th to 6th. And now I just hand over to Armin, who's going to tell us a little bit more about the topics for next year's conference. He's actually with the Federal Ministry of Science, Research and Economy, and also our link to the Presidency of Austria next year. So,
thanks a lot, Sabine. Well, tough job indeed to get stuff for a new conference, because after yesterday and today, I would have at least ideas for 3 other conferences. That was really inspiring. Thanks again, Kosice. Well, I'm a strong believer of the Week of Innovative Regions in Europe being a mirror of the variety and diversity of locations. If you think that Kosice is the eastern hub of Slovakia, Innsbruck would be the academic center of Western Austria. And although both cities belong to neighboring countries in the middle of Europe, and our capital cities are just 50 kilometers away from each other, if you look at Kosice and Innsbruck, they are at roughly 1,000 kilometers distance from each other. So there is a big difference in perspective and also in the scope that we find even in small countries, and that should be mirrored, I think. Innsbruck 2018 will be the first WIRE conference in the Alpine macro region, and I think there are some topics already in the air that are in common in Alpine regions, but that also could inspire innovators and innovation experts like you coming from other regions, because you find similar challenges as well in your regions, I'm sure. I'm talking about the tremendous effects of climate change. I'm talking about the urbanization of previously rural areas versus the remoteness of mountain areas, for example. Of course, digitization is an issue, and smart not only cities but also villages. We think of starting there and taking that as a starting point to set out to find smart tracks towards creating regional innovation systems. And our preliminary thoughts would be starting in 3 dimensions. So that will be the title of next year's conference. We would like to tackle the 3 dimensions, starting with new innovation frontiers from basic research and the role of higher education institutions. Sabine mentioned the prominence of services and also tourism, and we find that these are maybe underrated as drivers for innovation. And thirdly, there is industries, there are makers, and there is smart production. Also in times of service orientation production, there is a renaissance of production, of smart production, and of the role of industry for regions. But these are just really preliminary thoughts. We also depend on your input, on the input of the WIRE community. And I think, Sabine, our website is open from today.
Yes, it's online, so please go check it out. We'll try to to add things as we go along, and you find a little information there and also a little red button that says call for ideas. So please, if you have any ideas for next year's input, suggestions, whatever it is, please let us know. The more we know, the more we can interact. I think the better this is going to be for the next conference. So please work with us.
We're starting today to create next WIRE Conference 2018, and we are calling upon you to give us your ideas. We are looking for interesting showcase examples, but also inspiring storytellers.
Absolutely.
So welcome to Innsbruck 2018, and we prepared a little introductory film for you.
Just a few pictures.
Wow. Thank you so much. Innsbruck. Innsbruck hat seine eigene DNA. Very nice. That's a very nice slogan as well. And yes, you have a big work to do to define the topics. There are so many, but your thoughts are really to the point. So I'm sure you will manage very well. And we will be looking forward to be there next year in Innsbruck. Ladies and gentlemen, this was it. Well, lunch is waiting for you, of course. Your flight is waiting for you to bring you somewhere in our beautiful Europe, somewhere in your region where you, and remind this please, where you are a leader. Because that's what and Richard was giving it back to us. We are the leaders of today. And if it's political, is it policy making, is it an entrepreneur, it does not matter. We are the leaders. If we don't make the change, then who will? So who, if not us? Let's put it that way. So thank you very, very much for attending and thank you once more, Professor Radoslav Delina, with your beautiful team for hosting us. And we will be meeting. We all will be meeting somewhere, someplace. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.